Hi, this is Kevin Trainer. Welcome to my lecture on Chapter 8 of the Layton text. And in Chapter 8, we're talking about planning releases and sprints, which for us in our class is going to mean planning sprints, okay? And to an extent, releases as well. We're doing a small project in our class, right? And so we're going to have one release. So we're going to plan one release, and so there's some release planning aspects are important to us. But generally speaking, when somebody wants to know about our release plan, we're going to say we have one release because we have a small project and that's the practical thing to do. Okay. Um, Now, if we were going to have more than one release, we'd have a lot more to say. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about planning sprints. Okay. First of all, haven't we done some planning during the work that we did in our agile planning? We Where we're doing the product vision and the product roadmap. Yeah, we have. Okay, so what are we doing now? Oh, so haven't we identified the requirements and come up with some estimates? Yes, we have in both cases. Now we're going to refine them further. Okay. If you only did a little bit of work when you were planning, well, you have a lot more to do now. If you did a lot of the work when you were planning, well, then you have less to do now. Okay. So we've already seen what a user story is because we talked about them when we were talking about chapter uh, 7. So let's just look right here. My computer's being a little pokey today. We're um, processing the last of the recordings, and that makes it go a little bit slower. So it has a title. It says as a type of user, and I promise to talk about that some more. I want to take this action so I get this benefit. Okay. Um, then we want to have, and these should be succinct enough to fit on the front of a 3x5 index card. Um, Neatly written. Okay. On the back, we want to have the acceptance criteria or the validation steps. And we say, when I take this action, this happens. Okay. And they talk about some other things that you can put in here. Things like the user story value and the effort estimate. Okay. All right, so let's go down and look at the example I talked about in the last lectures, and we'll talk about it again. Just go through it. Well, that wasn't what we wanted to happen at all. My computer's getting pretty busy with the work that we're doing to turn the last of the lectures into a YouTube video. Okay, so we have the title as I want to so that. So this is for a mobile banking system. The example that they kind of followed throughout this. So the title, Transfer Money Between Accounts. As Carol, she's a persona. I promise to talk about that some more. I want to transfer funds between accounts so that each account has the correct amount of funds. Okay, that's the value. That's the work. Um, that's the goal that the user has that they need to accomplish. And let's see, you can put the value on it, the estimate on it, and the author on it. Okay. Where are we going to put these? Are we going to put these onto index cards? No. We're going to put these into um, Jira software using the template for a an agile project. Okay, we're just going to put them into an application that we all share, so that we all have a copy of the cards. And then on the back of the card, or as the rest of the user story, we want to say, when I do this, something happens. So when I view my account, I see the option to transfer funds. When I select the transfer option, I choose between which accounts I want to transfer funds. When I select to transfer from, I see a list of accounts and balances. When I select to transfer to, I see a list of my accounts and balances. And then I would say, when I, when I select OK or transfer or execute or confirm, then it changes the balances in the accounts. I would have one more, okay? Because, we have to, even though that's implicit, that's a pretty big requirement, okay? So that's how we do these, okay? Now, uh, do we need to know more? Yes, we need to know more. When are we going to find out more? We're going to find out more when we're in the sprint that in which we commit to do the user story. We're going to come up with a list of questions about details of the design and the implementation. And then we're going to probably going to ask the product owner, who's a client person, and they're either going to answer the questions for us, or they're going to refer us to one of their other stakeholders who's got more information about what the requirements are. And we're going to be doing that at the same time that we're building the code. Okay, and what is going to be the documentation for this? Well, just the user story. That's it. And then the code itself. And if we've done, to the extent that we have test code, the test code will document it as well. Okay? Okay. Now, what I like about this book is it is a great recipe book. Okay, so things like identify the project stakeholders, identify who will use the product, working with the stakeholders to write down their requirements, and then they break those down even further. I'm not going to go through the details of these. I'm going to leave it for you to read the cookbook and to refer back to it while you're doing it. Okay, now identifying who will use the product. You'll remember in the example before, we used the name Carol. I think she's a persona. And I mentioned in the last of the lectures that there's a tradition from, it really grew out of usability and interaction design, of having these personas. And so we pick these kind of imaginary characters who are going to be users of our systems. And each of them is sort of an archetype. Okay, maybe we have some of the users who are young and computer savvy. Maybe we have some of the users who are older and maybe not so computer savvy. Maybe we have users of our system who are complete newcomers to whatever we're doing. And then we have some who are experts. Okay. So, I mean, there's all kinds of kind of scales in which you could try to represent your users. But what you do is you come up with names for the people. If you really get into this, you go and find a stock photo for them. You write a backstory for them. And you really kind of talk about what kind of things generally they want to get out of the system. So then the way that it helps you is that it really cuts down on speculation about who the users of the system are. Okay? When somebody tries to come up with a user story or a requirement of any variety, even a non functional requirement, you really have to be able to say, well, who from our list of personas is going to need that? And in my experience, when you're working on design, you do come up with, these kind of gee whiz things. Well, gee whiz, I think we ought to have a feature to do this. And then some people will say, oh, yeah, I think we need that. And what happens is that and then some other people on the team will say, well, no, I'm not sure. Well, what becomes the standard? Well, documents like the vision statement. But the other thing is, you have to be able to pick one of your personas, if you've done them, and say, well, this is for Carol. This is for Bob. This is for uh, Jesus. You have to pick a persona. If you can't pick the persona, then perhaps it's just a speculative idea. Okay, so that's the value of personas. And do you have to use them in your user stories? No, you don't. But I invite you to give it a try. Okay, so let's go down a little farther. Things are moving kind of slow today here on the computer. Sorry about that. Things have gone. I'll tell you what we do. We're going to take a pause and we're going to find the right spot. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back. I just want to point out there's a good example of creating personas on page 144. Okay, so we've already talked about those, but that's a good place to go to see personas. So we have another user story here. So there's another example of one for you to see. They talk again about how broken down or how aggregated the user story should be. And the user stories should be pretty operational. Okay, so for instance, if we were talking about the example that we just saw had to do with banking, right? And it was a user story to do a transfer. So I think that's a good size user story. Um, let's say uh, let's say we had a lot of we were going to create an ATM machine. Is that just one user story? No, that's probably a user story for transfer, one for deposit, one for withdrawal, one for balance inquiry. And sort of the same things would apply to the example that they have right here. Okay, historically we've used the ATM, but this isn't banking out in the cold, standing at the ATM. This is banking on your smartphone in the warmth of your living room. Okay. Uh, do we need to further aggregate these things? I don't think, for our purposes as both beginners and doers of small projects, I think we don't. Okay. Um, uh, so can user stories get too big? Yeah, I think they can get too big. Okay, and you get a feel for it. It's part of the art of this. Well, it's really a systems analysis activity, right? Um, uh, they have a they have one of these things. You want these. You want your user stories to have the following qualities: independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, small, and testable. So independent, okay, they shouldn't overlap each other. Negotiable, they shouldn't be overly detailed, so that you have to find out more information during the sprint. That's what they mean by negotiable. You're going to be negotiating this with the users. Valuable, it has to create value to the user. Estimable, you have to be able to estimate it. Okay, if you can't estimate how big it is, well, then you probably also can't do it very well. It should be small. So if you're going to err, right, um, then you probably want to err on the smaller side, on the disaggregated side. Okay, and it should be testable. You should be able to take the validation and acceptance criteria and know whether you've done it. Now, how do we do estimates? This is the first time that we really get into the estimates. It's pretty cool. Well, we try not to spend too much time doing it. We try to do it. We try to get a gut feel and a reaction. Okay, and the Scrum people have this approach. It's called estimation poker. Now, why poker? Well, because historically they've done it with cards. Okay, so there they are. Now, there are a couple of parts of this. One is that they use numbers in order to estimate the size of a user story. And they use the numbers from a number series called the Fibonacci number series. Why do they pick that one? Well, it's a very popular number series that has some interesting characteristics. But as you go along, each number is say you go from 1 to 2, it's twice as big. 3, not quite twice as big. 5, not quite twice as big. 8, not quite twice as big. 13, not quite twice as big. We're trying to make the numbers easy to pick. Okay, we don't want to fine tune our estimation so much that that we spend too much time doing it. This is structured guessing. Okay, so we don't want to put we don't want to pretend that we can structure guess in a highly um, accurate way. So the number series helps us to do that. How do the cards help? The cards help in that you get the team together, okay? You go through the user stories, and you know, ideally you've all seen them ahead of time, right? And you take user stories and go, well, this is user story X, and you say, okay, everybody pick their card, and then you all put them down at the same time. Okay? So you're not influencing each other by seeing each other's pick. Um, Now, what happens is that you either all agree, you all say it's a five. Well, great. Okay? You're done. It's a five. Okay? Um, if you don't all agree, whoever's doing the facilitation, typically the scrum master, is going to say something like, well, to the people who are on the high side or the low side, well, how strongly do you feel about that? And what are your thoughts? Why do you think they're that big? Well, sometimes we can talk it through pretty quickly, okay? And then we can come up with a number. So what we're looking for is a reasonable consensus of the group, and we want to do it pretty fast because we know, again, this is not wild ass guessing. This is structured guessing. Okay. Um, Typically, as you're going to see in a bit, we want to pick the numbers between 1 and 8. Okay, that's about the size we want a user story to be. Okay, and I think they said somewhere here, how many user stories do you want in a sprint? They say it here somewhere, and I'm just not really seeing it. But well, we'll see it in a bit. Okay. Now, do people actually use cards? Well, you don't have to use cards. You can all say what it is, or you can write it down. There are some interesting smartphone apps where you are holding your smartphone and you touch something and it puts the number up, and then you all turn your smartphone around. Okay, there are free apps both for uh, for all the smartphone platforms. There are even PDFs to download to create a free set of cards. So there's all kinds of things. Okay, that's what we're looking to do. Again, a lot of cookbook stuff here about how to get your team to do it. What I like about this is, are you going to remember how to do every aspect of this from the lecture discussion that we do in the reading? Well, probably not. You'll have a good idea, but you can open up this book and use it as a kind of a cookbook while you're doing it. Okay. Now, what if you have a lot of user stories to do? Well, they have this approach called affinity estimating, in which um, you take your stories and you sort them into piles. Okay. Now, how many piles do you have? Well, look, I think these are 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, uh, in a minute, if we go a little bit farther, I think they'll tell us. There we go. Here's the sizes. Yeah. Oh, yeah, right. So the points are 1 to 8, and the sizes are from extra small to extra large, uh, small and large, and medium is in the middle. Okay. So what are these points, right? What are they? Well, they are your team's uh, subjective feelings about how much work is in each of these things. Okay. Uh, can you compare these point estimates from team to team? No, you can't. Okay. We think it's enough that we try to get them reliable within our own team. Okay. And why do we do this? Why don't we try to turn them into man hours or person hours and all that kind of stuff? Well, there is a point where he kind of has you doing that, and I'm going to talk you out of it, actually. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to do lightweight estimating. Okay. We think there's a value in estimating and being thoughtful about how big things are, but we realize that you can get bogged down in it as well. And these are going to keep you from getting too bogged down. One of the things that we say is, and I don't know where he says it in this particular chapter, he may say it in his other book, is that before you put a user story into a sprint, it ought to be 8 or smaller. If it's bigger than 8, you've got to find some way to disaggregate it, turn it into more than one user story. Okay? Because you don't want to be working on pieces of work that are bigger than 8. Okay? I know this seems kind of arbitrary, but you'll get the hang of it, and I think you'll like it. Okay? Let's see. Release planning. Okay, now this is a thing that we only have to do so much of. Okay? Because we're doing a single release. Okay, why do people do more than one? Well, they do more than one because of this idea that we want to deliver useful functionality early and often. Okay, and the agile people, and particularly Layton, likes to talk about how agile can pay for itself. Okay, and if you can take a minimal set of marketable features and get those out into the field, release them into the field, then you can start to get the benefits back from the system that starts to pay it off before you're done with the whole thing. Okay? So they kind of say, how are they doing it here? They're doing it in 3 releases. They've got the highest priority features launch after 2 months. The next highest priority features launch after 3 more months, essentially. That's the idea. Okay? So this is a great idea. This is a great thing to look for. We're not going to be doing it in our class because, well, it's a class. We do our project during our class. And the size of project that we're doing really lends itself to one release. What else do we want to do? Okay, so what do you do for the release? You establish the release goal, you identify the target release date, review the product backlog and the roadmap to determine the highest priority user stories that support your release goal, refine the user stories in your release goal, estimate the number of sprints needed on the Scrum team's velocity. Now, velocity is, I may have gone past that in the chapter, but it's a very interesting, it's very interesting concept. It is simply the number of points that your team accomplishes in a sprint. So let's say you do 25 in you get 25 points worth of work done in a sprint, then you have a velocity of 25. Okay. We realize that you're probably going to make a slow start and then you're going to get up to a steady state because this is a new process, this is a new team, and all of that kind of stuff. But eventually, a team's going to get to the point where they're good enough at coming up with the estimates and they're good enough at doing the work that their velocity in terms of points is getting kind of steady. So then you can look at the workload. You can look at everything in the rest of in the product backlog, or everything you want to put into a release, and you can use that to say, well, I think that's going to take 4 sprints, or I think we've got another 9 sprints worth of work. Now, if you only have been authorized to work another 5 sprints and you've got 9 sprints worth of work, well, then you've got to begin to work with the product owner to talk about making sure we get the highest priority work into the schedule that's approved. Okay, and talking about what's left over and whether they can come up with the funds to put more sprints on the schedule. Okay, so that's how velocity works. Can you compare the velocity of Team A to Team B? No, you can't. Why? Well, because we're only trying, when we're using the point system, we're only trying to get consistency within the team. So a 5-point user story for Team A may be bigger than a 5-point user story for Team B. We're not trying to get everybody in the organization. That's really beyond our goals for in research. We call this intercoder reliability. Okay, we only want to be able to get it down to the team. So you can't compare the velocity from team to team, but you can, over time, compare the velocity of a team to itself as it's trying to refine its estimating abilities and its execution abilities. And so this is how the user stories fit into the release. Okay, and again, this is just more detail that's coming out of the product roadmap. Okay, but for us, we're going to have one release. Okay, so in your report, I'm going to expect you to have a release plan, but I'm only going to expect it to take up a sentence or two because, well, we've already said the size of the project is small, and the practicality is that a single release is what's appropriate. Okay, but you will have to say that. Sprint planning. Let's look at this a bit. Again, sprint planning happens inside the sprint. How can we get away with that? Well, we can get away with it because we know how long the sprint is. What we're trying to do is we're trying to say, as we begin, the sprint, what things and how many things are we going to put in the backlog for the sprint such that we get the value that we want and we can get the work done within the sprint. Okay. Is this something that the development team does all by themselves? No, they do it in consultation with the product owner. Okay. The product owner is really calling the shots in terms of the priority of the work. The development team has more information about what parts go together. Okay. If we're going to build a bunch of parts in a sprint that don't go together, then we're not going to create lots of value at the end of the sprint. So there's a point of view that comes from the development team that leads towards good sprint planning. And there's the point of view that comes from the product owner, who should have maybe a greater marketing focus. And the collaboration is we decide what's going to fit into a sprint. And of course, the number of points that work adds up to should be consistent with what we think we can do. So there's a part of the chapter here when they tell you that your you ought to take your user stories and break them down into tasks. And I'm going to say that uh, certainly you don't have to do that for my benefit. Okay. Um, you can have people working on a user story. If you need to divide it up into different tasks for practicality, you can certainly do it. Okay. They even have you come up with the person hours that each of the tasks is going to take. I think they do that to in order to please the project accounting people who are used to getting that from more traditional approaches. What we really need to know, though, is how many points we're burning off on uh, in each of the sprints. So, for our purposes in my class, uh, we can track things by points. Okay. Um, you you create this thing called a burn down chart, which we'll see in a minute, and that shows over the life of the sprint how many things did we complete in what time frame, and of course we burn down the points in the sprint. They have some versions of it in the book here where we've converted it to person hours and we're burning that down. I think that's a complexity that, again, we're not going to need in our class, so we're not going to do it. The sprint planning meeting takes a half a day or less. And again, you're picking the stuff that goes into the sprint, user stories and tasks that are non functional requirements. Here we're beginning to see a board that would represent the plan. Okay. And you can see this is a burn down chart. Okay. They talk about hours and points remaining. For us, it's just going to be points remaining. Okay. And if during the sprint planning session you pick exactly right, well, you're going to burn them all the way down to zero. Now, what happens if you get done early? It's okay to work on um, user stories and tasks for the future. Some hardcore people will say you can do them, but don't kind of advertise them in your sprint review. Just put them into the next sprint, count them as already done, and review them in that. Okay. Other people would say, well, if it's done, it's done. Just add them to the review. Um, you guys can adopt either point of view. Okay, so how long is the sprint planning meeting? Well, if it's a 2 week sprint, up to 4 hours. Okay, 4 hours or less. So you're not going to use a whole day to plan the sprint if it's a 2 week sprint. Okay, it's really important. I see the word here, time boxing. It's really important to keep to the length of the sprint. Okay, uh, there is this aspect, two aspects that really work for Agile. Time boxing. Time boxing is we have a time box. A sprint is a time box. It's for us. It's going to be 2 weeks long. It keeps pressure on the team to only do the most important things. To the extent that you feel that you can expand the time box, well, then the pressure releases. Okay? You lose that benefit. So we're not going to expand the time box. We're going to keep the sprint the length it is. Um, and the other thing is uh, the requirements have to compete in order to be chosen to be put into the sprint. Okay, so those two aspects of Agile are part of what it makes it go. The time boxing and the competition among the requirements to get to the top of the list and be chosen for the next sprint. Okay, those are very unique, very important features of how uh, how Agile has the power that it does. Um, Again, when you're picking the user stories and or tasks that are going to go into the sprint, again, there are well, of course, you had your roadmap, so you can look back to that. Um, the product owner should have a marketing kind of focus, so they should know what's most important to them. Okay, and the development team should have a focus of again, what parts go together such that we don't build a lot of things that don't create value together. All right, and um, here on page 160, breaking down user stories into tasks for the sprint backlog. Um, I don't. I don't see the value in that. I think if you've again, if you see the value, do it by all means. Okay, with our Jira software product and the Agile template, you can do it easily. And so there's no reason to not do it if it's important to your team. But it's not something that you have to do. Okay. Um, what else do we want to talk about? We're getting close to the end here. Uh, there's a really interesting point in the bottom of 161 going on to 162 where they say, don't expect you are going to be completely efficient and good at this uh, uh, process of picking the right amount of work that's going to get done in a sprint. They said, here's a scenario where in sprint one, they only got done a quarter of what they thought they got done. In sprint two, they got 50% of it done. In sprint three, 75%. In sprint four, they've really hit stride. They're at 100%. For our small projects, we only have four regular sprints. So you will get to the point where you're good at this estimating and sprint planning and getting the burn down chart to work exactly right. You're going to get just good at that by the time you finish your project. But hopefully, this is a skill that you carry on with you into your day job. And that is it for chapter 8. Okay, so uh, I'm going to say bye until next time. Bye bye.